Welcome to Coruzant Technologies, home of the Digital Executive Podcast.
Welcome to the Digital Executive. Today's guest is Aditya Bhamidipaty. Aditya Bhamidipaty is the founder and CEO of FirstHive, a global customer data platform. He has been a serial technology entrepreneur solving problems for marketers. His stewardship has helped FirstHive to be among the first few to imbue machine learning into customer data profiling, delivering 6 times ROI to some of the world's largest brands on their marketing initiatives. Aditya started his career with Procter & Gamble, where he played a pivotal role in turning around a loss-making region into a profitable one in record time, which then became the highest growth area for P&G. From there, he moved on to join iGate, a global technology and consulting solutions provider in London. He was responsible for the UK and Western Europe region before moving back to India for his first startup gig. He was the co-founder and CEO of eSmart Solutions, which grew into one of India's leading loyalty and engagement companies. He exited eMart in 2015 to work on a new product, FirstHive. Well, good afternoon, Aditya. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. Very good to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you for making the time and hailing out of that great part of Cupertino, Santa Clara area in California, close to that Silicon Valley area. We have a lot of guests from there on the podcast. So I appreciate you making the time. And Aditya, we're going to jump right into your first question. Can you share what inspired you to transition from corporate roles at P&G and iGate to founding your own companies? What were the key challenges and milestones in this journey?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I'm very excited to be on this podcast. My journey of entrepreneurship, while formally it began with me quitting iGate to starting my own startup gig, I would say my real kind of commitment to the idea of being an entrepreneur was probably seeded in me very, very early as a young kid. And I still remember actually being in engineering and wanting to do my engineering because I thought that would give me a good foundation for something I wanted to do later. So I've had this entrepreneurial bug in me, if you can call it that, for a really long time. P&G was an incredible experience for me. It was what I couldn't have asked for anything better than the kind of role that I had at P&G. But quitting P&G to me was really one of my first kind of moves to commit towards entrepreneurship because I gave up on what I thought was an incredible career that I had at P&G, a great start, and took up something which is very, very different from what I did at P&G to move to a system integrator like iGate and running it in Europe. But one of the things that was common across my P&G and iGate days was I was going to very similar kind of industries. At P&G, I was with a large consumer CPG company. And then at iGate, I was basically selling to retail, telecom, media, and I had very similar companies as P&G as my clients. So I got to see the same broad, opportunities, challenges, but from a technology perspective, something that I had seen from being within P&G in a sales and marketing role. And then eventually my first gig really was born out of these two experiences. And then when I started eMart, it was me going back to something I had done very early on in my P&G days, which is to be able to support enterprises on their trade marketing and loyalty. And that's how I co-founded my first company and took that to some of the largest enterprises in retail, manufacturing, banking, healthcare, and so on. And we did some incredible programs around customer engagement, loyalty. In fact, grew it to be among the top 3, top 5 players in the space. And grew it to be like almost a 200 member company. And yeah, so that was very, very exciting. Multiple milestones that we traversed in that journey, from raising our first capital to the first customer win to going beyond, starting to become a company which is when you go beyond 10 people, 20 people, and then really getting into a scale mode when you have 100 plus clients and 150, 200 people team. So very, very interesting, I would say, journey as an entrepreneur.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, a lot of people do have that bug. They obviously start out and get some great experience at some great companies. But I like your story, the excitement in your voice about, the passion and the growth of your baby. Basically, you're raising a baby as your own company. And I really love those stories. So I appreciate that. And Aditya, With your background in enhancing customer experience, what specific gap did you see in the market that led you to the creation of FirstHive? And how does FirstHive address this gap?
That's a great question. To be honest, I think all of my experiences before FirstHive were all contributing factors to FirstHive because I was witness to the same opportunities and problems, but from different perspectives across my 3 different experiences prior to FirstHive. And that was how companies were operating at that intersection of data, technology, and marketing, especially through my agency days, which is the EMART company that I'd co-founded. We had seen it very closely because we were running operations and we saw how much opportunity was left on the table with all of the data that was getting generated, but how enterprises were struggling with being able to consume the data or being able to capitalize the intelligence that was getting generated to be able to use it and monetize it going forward. Instead, most of the customer experience engagement programs were very, very isolated from most of other marketing initiatives. Data was isolated and scattered. And therefore, FirstHive was really, it was very obvious to us as we had scaled in our business that there was tremendous opportunity that enterprises left on the table around taking control of that data and not expensing out all of those initiatives, but really can we create meaningful asset out of that and help them deliver consistent customer experience. And having been in the loyalty space, one of the things that we very strongly believed was, if a brand was to expect loyalty, it's almost table stakes for the brand to be able to demonstrate loyalty to its consumers first before you demand loyalty. And how do you demonstrate loyalty? The first step in being able to demonstrate loyalty is at the very least recognize the consumer before you expect or demand loyalty from the consumer. And that was really where the whole idea of how most marketing still tended to be broadcast with very little to do with the consumer and really more to do with channel optimization was something that we had our own eureka moment in as we were doing that. And that's how we really started to build our prototype. We actually called our prototype the God system, a little pun on that, but God, as we called it, was GAWD, a good analyzer of white data, as a true engineering grad. And what we basically said was that there's so much data that was getting generated. This was no longer the era of data paucity, but really an era of data opulence, but insight paucity. And if you had the right antenna, you can translate that data into insights and really put it to meaningful use. But if you did not have the right antenna to process it, or if you did not have the right methods to extract, consolidate, and make it useful, it was all just white noise. And that is where we said FirstHive was going to start making the difference. And that's how FirstHive was born. What we did at FirstHive was ask ourselves, how does an enterprise truly start taking control of its customer experience to drive ROI? And we broke it down really into 3 steps. We said, first, we need to be able to unlock and acquire all the consent data that consumers were giving to enterprises, which the enterprise therefore had legitimate access to, but it was not able to either bring it in, or it could bring it in partially, or it was even after bringing in, it could not connect with the other data sets that it was already having. So how do you bring the data in? And then how do you connect this data? Because the way we saw it, Brian, is that at every interaction between a consumer and a brand, there's an explosion of intelligence that happens. And if only you could bring that in, you can now start having meaningful conversations. My favorite example on that is if you walk into a supermarket and you see a Gillette razor on the aisle, the razor says, "Hey, Aditya, I'm a great product," but it says that to everybody who passes the aisle. It says, "I'm a great product, buy me." But what if it could say, "Hey, Aditya, welcome back. This is the 15th anniversary of your first shave." Suddenly a broadcast becomes a conversation. And how can we help enterprises do that? So those were some of the drivers for us as we started building FirstHive. And given that we were focused on consumer, it was natural for us to conclude that in the consumer world, where there's millions of consumer interactions that are happening in real time, if you could not process the data in real time, and if you cannot use probabilistic methods to connect the dots, and if you cannot have the machine do this, but you still depended on the human to do this manually, you will still be prone to the same game of chance probabilities. And, marketing still continues to be one of the low conversion industries when you look at the amount of communication that is thrown and what percentage of it actually translates into a transaction. And that is where FirstHive really came in and said, how do we help enterprises take control of the data, build those unified identities, and then allow enterprises to be consistent and cohesive to drive conversions. And that's what FirstHive really brought in.
Thank you for breaking that down. And I liked how you started out the conversation with, you need to demonstrate to the customer before you demand their loyalty. And then, if you can get the right and direct message, personalize that message. You mentioned the Gillette razor as an example. And I think that's awesome. And I'm glad you saw a gap there and jumped in. So I appreciate that. And Aditya, if you could briefly share, FirstHive was among the first to integrate machine learning into customer data profiling. Can you discuss how this technology has evolved within your platform and the impact it has had on your clients?
Sure. See, legacy systems, or at least most marketing tools, took a very, what I would say is a CRM-ish approach to customer 360, which is you would essentially use primary keys of email or mobile to connect two different data sets. So what most tools would do really was glorified VLOOKUPs on the basis of primary keys to connect and merge two data sets to arrive at a single data record and call it a customer 360. But there are some fundamental challenges with that kind of an approach that tools took. Most legacy tools found this convenient and were constrained by their technology, that was being deployed. But if you go down to first principles, what a single record customer 360 implies is that each one of us as consumers will always operate at the averages of our aggregate behavior. And that's simply not true. Each one of us as a consumer is always driven by the context with which we come to a brand. And it is through the prism of that context that our actions and behaviors have to be understood. We are not always the same. We are not always operating at the averages. This is crucial when you're designing a system that needs to play in real time at scale. And also one of the components of our vision was that eventually all of customer experience will have to be autonomously driven, at least at a baseline, by the machine, almost like your co-pilot, and then allow the human to kind of come in and orchestrate on top of it. Now, if the machine has to be able to do that, you need your data in a manner in which it is machine friendly and it is as granular as you can get. So the insights that you have on the customer or the consumer are contextually relevant to what the consumer is doing now. For that, a single merged record was meaningless. And therefore, when we started building FirstHive with identity as the core of the platform, what we did was take a completely different approach, but an approach that was true to human behavior, which is to look at every interaction as a unique interaction driven by context, and then to deliver context-enriched identities and really create a trail of interactions, because we are all a collection of discrete interactions with a brand, and each interaction driven by a context, and then derive what the consumer preferences are and make sure. And when you do this model, you cannot just use deterministic VLOOKUP methods, but you have to look at probabilistic methods, because all interactions that are happening, you don't have the same identity. You don't have all the identity vectors. You have partial information coming in. You have some anonymous interactions and so on and so forth. So how do you still make sense of all of that and then really bubble it up to feed the machine to be able to allow for autonomous delivery of customer experience? And that's how FirstHive really changed the game in the way it brought identity to the core of understanding consumers. And with that, Brian, the biggest difference is that now enterprises do not have to think about list optimization or channel optimization, but can really start thinking about who are the consumers that are right for this communication, and who should I reach out to, and how do I really personalize it to the node, which is at a segment of one, and you are making sure that you're able to do it at scale. So it's almost like everywhere, every time, but with everyone, you're able to be unique and personalized and in real time. And that's the big difference that we brought in. And because of this, the impact is humongous. I would say the impact, at a high level, there are three big areas of impact. First is unlocking of data. Humongous amount of data gets unlocked because when we come in, we're not just resolving identities, but actually unlocking identities which are all scattered in different systems. Two, we are delivering the richest, most granular identity trails that become available because we deliver these time series trails and we maintain that as the persistent identity layer. And third, we are allowing for portability of all of this data and insights from a customer experience standpoint, which means not only are you able to do all of this segmentation, campaign management, journey orchestration, or being able to push this data to any other destination system, but you're also able to make AI models read of this. You're able to train your LLMs. You're able to bring in other applications to read of this data. So you really start embedding the brain in the body of what was before a multi-headed hydra, and you're now making it a cohesive organism that's able to recognize and deliver cohesive communication to its consumers. So huge impact all the way from knowing, unlocking data, understanding your user, to delivering ROI and customer experience.
Thank you. I appreciate you breaking that down, Aditya. You're right. In order to get it right with the customer and to leverage all that data, you need all the data. And of course, using a large language model is so important, but you have to move to that probability to understand the customer and where this might go. And you can't do that as a human, as you know, with all the different data points we collect these days. So I appreciate the share. And Aditya, last question of the day, if you could briefly share, you've spoken about the power of hyper-personalization in marketing. Could you explain how FirstHive enables this at scale and perhaps share an example of its success?
Sure. Hyper-personalization is the easiest way to think about hyper-personalization is how do we make sure that we are really having one-on-one conversations between the brand and the consumer, because each consumer could be at different points in their own engagement cycle with a brand. There are different points in that purchase cycle or advocacy cycle. And how do you make sure that you're not sending one message to everybody, right? So if you think about where marketing was 30 years back, it was one billboard on 101 that would probably put the same message to everyone, versus as you started going through media, you had surrogation, and then you went in through digital media where you had more surrogation and segmentation. And now, as you've taken control of first-party data, you really know your consumer. Then can we talk meaningful contextual messaging? Can we ensure that there's meaningful contextual messaging to the consumer and not a generic conversation to everybody? What that means is that instead of sending an email campaign to, let's say, 500,000 people, can the machine recommend to you which are those 320,000 people that need to get a message? And then for each one of them, can all the components of the message be personalized? So you don't start by saying, I want to send an email campaign. You start by saying, who are the consumers who are most likely to respond for this objective of mine? And for each one of those consumers, what is the form factor? What is the channel? What is the content? What is the creative? At what time? And can the machine optimize all of those different dimensions and ensure that it's all delivering that autonomously in real time? That is really hyper-personalization at scale, right? So you're able to do this omni-channel. You're able to do this with personalized content, and you're able to do it at the right time for each consumer, all under a single campaign, but it's all omni-channel and omni-content. We've seen some significant benefits to enterprises on this. The fact that you're going in with more context automatically ensures that there is higher conversions. We've seen enterprises see between 10-12% to about 60% improvements in their conversions, 6 times in certain cases versus what kind of conversion throughputs they were having. Even though you're sending the communication out to a smaller number of people, you basically start getting a significantly higher conversion percentage. And business objectives, the attribution ability, because you're breaking this down to which interaction led to conversion, the ability to attribute success and therefore to scale the most relevant interaction becomes much better, and therefore comes back into the circle of control of the enterprise rather than spray and pray and then hope that your marketing is working. Those are some of the things that we've seen.
Thank you so much, Aditya. I appreciate that. I really do. You broke down quite a bit. And you all know today we're numb to the spray and pray. We get these emails that are just so generic to us, and it doesn't make any sense. And it leaves a bad taste in our mouth with receiving marketing letters. So I appreciate it. I really do. And I love how you went in through the hyper personalization in marketing and how you're really making this a game changer. I appreciate that. And Aditya, it was such a pleasure having you on today, and I look forward to speaking with you real soon.
Absolutely, Brian. It was a pleasure connecting with you as well, and have a good rest of the day.
Bye for now.